Since the beginning of the human history, Africa is always a magical place for the rest of the world. The nature, beauty, and different mentality of its people always attracted outsiders. In our time, although most of the continent are now considered to be modern and safe, there are still some countries who could not solve their issues regarding the safety of its people and tourists. With escalating violence and humanitarian crises, these nations face challenges that threaten the safety and well-being of their citizens, highlighting a critical need for attention and intervention. Africa is rich in culture and diversity and is home to some of the world's most dangerous countries. Somalia, with a score of 3.036 on the 2024 Global Peace Index, GPI, Somalia is among the most dangerous nations. The country has been in a condition of constant instability due to decades of fighting, a lack of central government, and the continued existence of terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab. Particularly Al-Shabaab continues to pose a serious threat because of its repeated bombings, killings, and attacks on government targets and civilians alike, all of which erode security. Large areas of the country are difficult for the weak government to keep under control, particularly in the rural areas, where extremist organizations and militias with a focus on clans operate freely. Because there is no central government, there is lawlessness and a high rate of crime, such as armed robberies, kidnappings, and piracy along Somalia's coast. Poverty and humanitarian crises also add to Somalia's dangers. Famine, exacerbated by droughts and conflict, has left millions food insecure. Healthcare and education are severely underdeveloped, and much of the population lacks access to basic services. Also, the displacement of over 2 million people due to conflict and environmental disasters contributes to worsening conditions in the country. In 2024, Somalia remains a high-risk environment where terrorism, lawlessness, and humanitarian challenges combine to make it one of the most risky places to live in Africa. Mali is among the most dangerous nations in Africa, with a Global Peace Index, GPI score of 2.963 in 2024, mostly as a result of ongoing military conflicts and political unrest. The country's north and center continue to be epicenters of bloodshed as Islamist insurgencies, including those affiliated with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, wreak havoc on both civilian populations and law enforcement. These organizations regularly carry out assaults, kidnappings, and bombs against both civilians and members of the armed forces. The emergence of ethnic militias has additionally exacerbated the violence, as conflicts between competing communities frequently result in mass murders and displacements. Even with the assistance of foreign troops, the Malian government finds it difficult to stay in power, especially in the country's more isolated areas. The 2021 military coup further weakened Mali's political landscape, creating a power vacuum that allowed extremist groups to expand their influence. Humanitarian crises further compound Mali's dangers. Over 2 million people have been displaced due to violence, and large portions of the population face acute food insecurity. Access to education and healthcare remains limited, particularly in conflict-affected areas, leaving citizens vulnerable to disease and malnutrition. In 2024, Mali's combination of terrorism, ethnic conflict, and political instability make it one of the most dangerous places in Africa. Burkina Faso. With an Islamist insurgency's increasing violence, Burkina Faso has become one of the most dangerous countries in Africa, with a global peace index (GPI) score of 2.868 in 2024. Al-Qaeda and ISIS-affiliated groups have established strongholds in the country's north and east and frequently target civilians, law enforcement officers, and public servants. These terrorist organizations use violent methods including bombs, kidnappings, and massacres, which greatly increase the risk of daily life for residents. Large swaths of the nation are difficult for the government to keep under control, particularly in rural areas where armed groups have established strongholds. The nation is becoming even more unstable as a result of the rise in banditry brought on by this lawlessness, with armed groups targeting markets, communities, and schools. The insurgency has also crippled the country's economy, forcing over 2 million people to flee their homes, creating one of the fastest-growing displacement crises in Africa. Besides the violence, Burkina Faso faces a humanitarian crisis. Many areas are experiencing severe food insecurity due to the conflict, and access to basic services like healthcare and education is limited, particularly in regions under militant control. In 2024, Burkina Faso remains gripped by a worsening conflict, where terrorism, displacement, and poor governance contribute to its status as one of Africa's most dangerous countries. South Sudan. South Sudan is one of the most dangerous countries in Africa, with a 2024 Global Peace Index GPI score of 3.221. Since it started in 2013, the country's civil strife has persisted, escalating instability, violence, and economic suffering. Large portions of the nation remain insecure as a result of periodic fighting between government forces and other rebel factions, even after a peace deal was reached in 2018. One of the key drivers of danger in South Sudan is the pervasive violence tied to ethnic conflicts. Armed organizations frequently target people, which results in a significant death toll, community ruin, and relocation. Also, South Sudan lacks effective government and law enforcement, which fosters the growth of illegal operations like kidnapping, armed robbery, and people trafficking. Humanitarian crises also plague the country. Food insecurity driven by conflict and climate-related disasters leaves millions in dire need of assistance. The government struggles to provide basic services like healthcare and education, further destabilizing communities. Moreover, the rampant use of small arms across the country exacerbates the violence, making everyday life dangerous for civilians. In 2024, South Sudan remains a volatile nation where insecurity, corruption, and ethnic violence make survival an ongoing challenge for its citizens. Central African Republic, crime, civil unrest, kidnapping or hostage-taking. With a 2024 Global Peace Index, GPI, score of 2.934, the Central African Republic is still among the most dangerous nations. The country is permanently unstable due to decades of military strife, extreme poverty, and political unrest. Rival militias, many of which are founded on racial and religious differences, are the main source of fire for the continuing civil war, which broke out in 2008-2012. These gangs regularly fight violently, killing civilians as their aim, and carrying out crimes like forced relocation, sexual assault, and mass murder. Large portions of the nation are under the control of armed factions, which threatens the legitimacy of the national government. With widespread kidnapping, extortion, and illegal arms trade, crime and violence are allowed to grow in the absence of efficient law enforcement. The presence of foreign mercenaries, particularly from Russia's Wagner Group, further escalates tensions, leading to more civilian casualties and the destruction of infrastructure. Central African Republic also suffers from severe humanitarian crises. Over half of its population relies on international aid, and around one-third have been forcibly displaced. Access to food, clean water, and medical care is limited, particularly in conflict zones, leaving millions vulnerable to starvation and disease. Nigeria continues to rank among the most hazardous nations in Africa, with a Global Peace Index, GPI, score of 2.713 in 2024. This is mostly because of the intricate network of crime, ethnic conflict, and insurgency that afflicts the country. The Islamic State West Africa province, ISWAP, a branch of the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast, continues to intimidate both military personnel and civilians by carrying out bombs, kidnappings, and massacres. In nearly the previous 10 years, the violence has resulted in nearly 2 million people being displaced and tens of thousands of deaths.
Protect them.
Nigeria confronts serious problems from banditry in the northwest and central areas besides the Islamist insurgency. Armed groups, often referred to as bandits, engage in mass abductions, extortion, and violent raids on villages, further destabilizing the country. The rise of these criminal networks has made travel in many parts of the country dangerous, with both rural and urban areas affected. Ethnic tensions, particularly between nomadic herders and farmers, fuel violence in the central region, known as the Middle Belt. These clashes are often over land and resources, leading to deadly conflicts. The government's struggle to control these multiple security threats, combined with high poverty levels and corruption, make Nigeria one of the most dangerous places to live in Africa in 2024.